Reporting from the White House here in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America, to our viewers in the United States of America and across the world. I'm Charles EBUNE, and this is a very special edition of Globewatch. U.S. first female Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, is quoted to have said, the United States of America is an indispensable nation in the world. But announcing a possible pull-out of the United States of America from the Paris climate change deal, President Donald Trump said he was elected to represent the people of Pittsburgh and not the people of Paris. That in itself puts pressure to the diplomatic community on U.S. foreign policy options in the era of the Donald Trump administration. So what does the ex-established foreign policy experts think of Donald Trump's policies across the world? Former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush, Ambassador Stuart Holliday, welcome to Globewatch.
It's a pleasure to be here.
There are basically 4 or 3 ideologies that define U.S. foreign policy engagements: idealism versus realism, unilateralism versus multiculturalism, and interventionism versus isolationism. Where do you place the Donald Trump presidency?
I think that the president ran on a campaign that was more of a realism campaign. The previous 2 administrations, even though they were Republican and Democrat under President Bush and President Obama, both had a certain amount of idealism behind them. They were built in the view that, slightly differently, but that the world was a world of coalitions, that the world was a world of relationships, and that the framework of those relationships created more stability and prosperity for the American people. The president was elected on a platform by people who believed that perhaps we had gone too far in that direction. And these were people, many of whom felt that the new globalization and the multilateral institutions somehow or another did not have their interests at heart when they were making policy. And so you see this is probably what you would call a little bit of a reaction. And if you look at American history, there are ebbs and flows of the tide. The tide moves, before the Second World War, there was isolationism. Afterwards, a war of necessity. We created the United Nations with other countries. We created the World Bank. We were the Marshall Plan, all of these different things. And so the big sweep of history is more internationalism, but right now you see concern by everyday Americans about what it means for them.
You just said that the president ran on a ticket of realism. Does that explain the fact that roughly 70 U.S. embassies around the world today, out of the roughly 207, do not have an ambassador? You know very well that the United Nations counts some 194 countries.
Sure.
The Federation of International Football Association, one of the largest nation bringing together body, counts roughly some 204 countries. And the United States diplomatic tentacles are everywhere. What kind of interpretation do you give to such a foreign policy withdrawal?
Well, I think there are 2 separate issues. One is, what is the policy? The policy, again, more of a nationalistic policy, a policy of not necessarily spreading the values in a more Wilsonian framework to other countries. But there's the mechanics of policy. And the mechanics are that in our system, about a third of our ambassadors that serve abroad are political appointees, 2/3 are career officers. And many of the vacancies that we see they're in both cases. But most...
Do you find it funny that the United States of America today, who has as one of its strategic allies Germany, that there will be no ambassador to Germany? Do you find that consumable?
Well, I know there's been somebody selected for Germany. The system is flawed in terms of how long it takes for an ambassador to get confirmed and then get to post. So, step one, usually somebody who is elected president is either a politician who has many policy people that are there that are waiting to go, or they have, in some cases, contributors, people who support that campaign. In this case, you had a businessman who did not have either of those things. So he didn't have what you would call in sports, a bench of people waiting. So that means they had to identify people. Then those people have to go through a very extensive background and ethics investigation. Do they have conflicts? Can they be confirmed? Because all of these people have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Then they go and their names are sent to the Senate, and the Senate can take up to 6 months to take action on a nominee because it's tied up into a lot of other legislation.
History proves that the Donald Trump presidency is the best example of large gaps, personnel gaps, 10 months into the White House. That did not happen with Bush, that did not happen with Barack Obama, that did not happen with Clinton. There is even a possibility that one of these days, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will be out of office.
Well, I think if you look at every administration, for example, when I was in the personnel office, our ambassador to the United Nations wasn't confirmed until after September the 11th of 2001. So that was almost a year after the president had picked John Negroponte, who I ended up working for. So it's not new. I think that what you have, though, at the State Department now is in addition to the ambassadors, you also have vacancies in a lot of the senior assistant secretary positions and policy positions. That's a little new. The fact of the matter is we're behind, and I think a country that is serious about international affairs needs to fill those positions as quickly as possible.
You were somehow director of personnel at the White House just after 9/11, and you know the intricacies of managing personnel at the White House, especially the West Wing. When you see the high-profile dismissals and departures at the presidency of Donald Trump, the shortest-lived National Security Advisor, Michael Flint, the shortest-lived Director of Communications, 3 of them, the latest being Anthony Scaramucci, and the others. The list can go on. The firing of FBI Director James Comey and others. What do you think is actually going on at the White House? Confusion, chaos, like the media has qualified it, or political amateurism?
I think it's an administration that is new to government, where, again, there were not relationships built between different people that supported this candidate. There wasn't an infrastructure, and so you have sort of an ad hoc nature of putting it together.
Everybody has come from the Trump empire in the real estate world. So these are people who have been doing business for roughly 30 years together. They have done transactions. So they should understand each other better. But
if you look at the chief of staff, the first chief of staff, Reince Priebus, you look at John Kelly,
the current chief of staff.
Yeah, and you look at the national security advisor. None of these people knew Donald Trump. There's not
General McMaster.
General H.R. McMaster, who was really a scholar general. He was somebody who came out of the field in the Army of understanding complex counterinsurgencies. So I don't think it's the case that there are a lot of people from the Trump, there's certainly family members who've come to serve, but there are not a lot of people from the Trump business that are working. In fact, I don't know that there are any that are working in the White House. But you have this situation where You know, many people did not think Donald Trump was going to get the nomination for the Republican side. Then most people did not think he was going to win the presidency. And so you had, I think, a lot of people reluctant, perhaps, to sign on and to work as advisors and to build out his cabinet and kitchen cabinet because there was this perception that it was a very uphill climb, and he surprised everybody. So,
if you look at the president's pronouncements on foreign policy in particular, they are extremely controversial because the kind of world order we have known has been that of Americans' values contributing to global equilibrium. And Henry Kissinger, the father of global equilibrium, knows that better than I do. Trump comes in, he says the Iranian nuclear deal was a disaster. He says that the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement is trash, that NAFTA is the worst trade deal the United States of America has ever been engaged, that the Paris Climate Change deal is a horse to punish American business and make the Chinese the leaders of the world. And you can go on, total disengagement.
I think the president is a deal maker. This is what he has done his career. And I think in the question of these deals...
That sounds funny, because if the president is a deal maker or somehow a transactional leader, we would have had at least a bill passed in Congress since he came in.
Well, he would tell you that he's passed more bills than any other president.
Bush could be proud of the No Child Left Behind Act. Barack Obama could be proud of the Economic Recovery Plan just 3 days after office.
Right. Well, they have passed a lot of bills in the Congress. They're just not the ones that you hear about in the high-profile ones, like the health care repeal and you know, now
you're not talking about executive orders that any other president can do? No,
I'm talking about bills signed into law. But the point I was making is, I don't know that he wants to walk away from these deals as so much as he wants to renegotiate them or get some better conditions, better, even the people that support these deals. Most people in Washington, you have to compromise, right? You have to figure out, you know, in the Iran deal, you're dealing with other countries, too, besides the United States. It's not a treaty between Iran and the United States. So the question is, what's achievable? And I think that the president is of the view, and again, many people don't agree with it, but that we have to be more, I think, tougher in, you know, there's one view that you give to get, and there's another view that you get by starting with a more maximalist position and then you negotiate down. And in effect, that's been his experience. On the climate deal, I think there's a fundamental difference of view between different American constituencies. There are some who see our role as a major emitter of, you know, carbon and a significant, you know, automobiles and all this, and that we have a responsibility to be a leader in the climate change arrangement. But they look at China, they look at Russia, and they say, well, we're going to comply, right, because we're a rule of law society, we have laws, we do these things, but how are we going to enforce this in these other countries? And I think that for the previous president, the idea was if we set the bar and set the example, people will follow us. In this presidency, it's why should we agree to something if it won't be enforceable for other countries?
You are special assistant to President Bush, and just after the 9/11 attacks, a commission was created, a crisis management commission was created, and you handled that alongside Condoleezza Rice, the then National Security Advisor. When you listen to the utterances of the President of the United States of America today, claiming that licenses of some media organs, including NBC, should be suspended if coverage on him is not favorable, When you hear the President of the United States of America deliver comments he had to deliver after Charlottesville, when you listen to the President of the United States of America deliver the kind of speech announcing a withdrawal from the Paris climate change deal, are you disappointed with the way the rest of the world reads America today, that this was the heaven of democracy and human rights, and that there is a kind of the worst dictatorial management at the White House today, and those dictators in the Middle East, in Africa, and we know who they are, always sit and clap that, thank God, the moral authority of the U.S. is gone.
Right. Well, I'll challenge the question, actually. We have three institutions of government in this country, and when you use the term dictatorship, that's a bit too much. We have a Congress, we have a Supreme Court. They collectively govern this country, and I am confident that the system will function the way it should. Am I disappointed in some of the comments? Sure, I think a lot of people are. The president needs to be a unifier, somebody who brings people together. I do think, though, it is worth pointing out that even though I think it's not appropriate to question the role of the free media and to look at them in terms of their freedom to operate, which is one of our founding principles, it is also true that the media has changed in this country, that ratings, viewerships, that many media outlets are looking to speak to their own very discrete constituencies. And those constituencies want to hear what we call the red meat. Red meat for the left, red meat for the right. And so I think that, you used the term, you talked about Dr. Kissinger, and he had a great saying. He said, even a paranoid person can have real enemies.
Did you vote for him?
I'm not going to answer that question. That's a personal matter.
NAFTA, the Transatlantic Pacific deal with the European Union, trade deals with Germany. Do you think that the statistics provided by the current administration are a true reflection of what the real situation is? For example, the president says that the U.S. has a trade deficit with Germany roughly $60 billion.
We like German cars here, right? I think what the president is pointing out, or he believes, is that a bilateral trade deal, if properly constructed, is between two countries. A multilateral trade deal gets to a set of agreements that may not be as good a deal, and he's elected to represent the American people, for having a trade deal.
Let me tell you how the rest of the world reads the United States of America today. When I sit back in my country, Cameroon, and I drink with people in beer parlors, this is a discussion. Trump was brought into office with a single agenda, that the worst thing that ever happened to the United States of America was having a black man at the White House as president. And we have to do everything that Obama did, because to him, I'm sure George Bush will call that acts of evil leadership. You see everything that the president does is just a cancellation of what Obama did. Will you guys be happy that Donald Trump brings back to life Osama bin Laden if taking out a terrorist out of Americans was a bad idea?
So there's a lot to your question. First is, I don't think this is about race in this context. President Obama, who accomplished many things, had a very different, he was a constitutional law professor, he was a community organizer, but he fundamentally had a liberal point of view. That was part of what made guided his policy decisions. Whether it was how he viewed business, whether it was how he viewed perhaps our role in the world, but again, he ended up having a very aggressive foreign policy as it related to drones, as it related to taking bin Laden out.
You listened surely to President Donald Trump at the United Nations. It was a kind of George Bush-like speech. Either you are with us or you are against us. He framed it the other way. The United States of America is capable of destroying totally North Korea. The rhetoric from the White House has been like a child's play, that the president gets up at 2 a.m., tweets some ranting with some senators, Bob Cooker, who is going, the chairman of the House Foreign Relations Committee, and whatsoever. When you hear the kind of small boy talk by the president, if you do this, we'll harm, and North Korea does that, and he does nothing. Nobody takes you guys serious.
Yeah, I think there are two different issues. There's the tweets, right?
Should we use nuclear weapons?
To defend ourselves?
Should Hiroshima and Nagasaki be used for North Korea?
Only if the United States...
You worked at the United Nations on these issues.
Yeah, and I'm giving you
Is
a
that
direct
the
answer.
best solution?
No, it's not the best solution. But you're dealing with a madman. You're dealing with an unpredictable person who has threatened to, who has violated every international, Bush, Obama, Clinton, they have thumbed their nose at
Why do you
everything.
think that North Korea should respect UN resolutions when your best ally, Israel, has never respected and nothing has happened to him or her, for example?
I really don't think you can compare those two things at all. The Israelis and the resolution that they're governing, these are matters which the United Nations spends more time on than almost anything else.
You are today heading the international, MERIDIAN International Center here in Washington, from where we are doing the interview. And you qualify yourself as leaders in cultural diplomacy in order to bring people to better understandings across the world. You know that the budget of the State Department has been slashed by 28% in this current administration. What have you been doing over the years to create leaders?
Great question. First of all, thank you. And I know we've had many visitors from Cameroon, including yourself. So we are grateful to have friends in Cameroon. I think since 1960, this organization has identified what we would call emerging leaders, people that are accomplished civic or business or government leaders, because we think that if we build relationships between those people and their counterparts here in the United States, that we're going to have a better relationship with the country, but we're also going to increasingly share best practices. In the old days, it was come to America, see how we do it, and you'll learn something. Today, it's different. Come to America and let's understand what we have. What's the common challenge? What are you doing? How are you dealing with, pandemic disease? How are you dealing with economic development and entrepreneurship? How are you dealing with regulatory issues? All of these things we share, and culture is one of the elements. But the other really element is what I would call experiential learning. So today in schools, we hear from a professor who knows everything about that subject, right? It's one person. They may be the best professor in the world, but we believe that learning by interacting with a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different people and hearing different opinions, whether you agree with them or not, is healthy. And so our theory of change is if leaders understand other cultures, can collaborate, share best practices, and create networks, that we're going to have a better world.
How successful have you been in terms of numbers? Do you have some statistics to prove this work?
Yes, well, there's different anecdotal evidence. So, over 150 heads of state and heads of government, close to 1,000 cabinet members have gone on. We have African women entrepreneurs. We just had a great program who went back and wrote stories about how they learned to access capital, market their products more effectively.
You were special assistant to President Bush at a very critical moment in U.S. history, the 9/11 attacks, which completely reshaped U.S. foreign policy engagements and even the national thinking. When you look, the environment in which we live today is not quite different from 2001, a lot of terrorism. If you had to sit at the White House today as special assistant to President Donald Trump, in a single sentence, how will you shape his leadership execution?
Yeah. I would say study history and learn from the lessons of the past. Because while history does not repeat itself, it rhymes. And we need to learn and understand what has worked and what hasn't worked in the past and try to find the best policy we can to engage partners, other countries, in really creating a more hopeful world for all.
The former special assistant to President George W. Bush, now President and Chief Executive Officer of MERIDIAN International Center here in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much indeed for being guest on Globewatch. And I hope that next time I will be in Washington, we'll be having a one-on-one interview with President Bush.
That's right. Well, you'd have to go to Texas for that.